Section 5.3. In this section, you will see questions like this. Take one box to name each of the three marked chords. The key is E major. In order to do questions like this, we need to learn the concept of inversions. It's related to the idea of chords that we have been learning in the past two videos. In the context of chords, inversions refer to chords that are not in the original position as we normally see them. Let's take F minor as an example. All these three chords are chord 1 in F minor because they all have the notes F, A flat, and C. However, some of their notes are in different positions, and that's where the concept of inversion comes in. The first chord that we see here is called a root position, and this is typically the chord that we see when we speak of F minor 1 chord, and we call that a 1A. The second chord here is a little different because now the lowest note of this chord is the A flat instead, and not the F as it was in the original position. And here we call this chord a first inversion, or the 1B. Lastly, we have the same F minor 1 chord, but now with the C in the bass. That is the fifth note in the original root position chord. And in this case, it's called a second inversion, or the 1C. As we can see, the inversions of chords are always determined by the bass note. And here are a few terms that may be useful when we speak of inversions. Let's look at the root position chord again, the F, A flat, and C chord. The lowest note in this chord is called a root note, and the middle note is called the third note because that's the third interval above it. And we have the fifth note above it because that's an interval of a fifth from the root note. Now, when we look at the second chord, the root note, that is the F in this case, has gone elsewhere. It's no longer serving as the lowest note, or what we call the bass note. And importantly, here's also why we need to know the difference between the terms root and bass, because they don't mean the same thing. Whilst the root note is also the bass note in a root position chord, they are not the same when we speak of the first inversion or later the second inversion chords. And now going back to the chord we're looking at, we have the same fifth note in the same place, that is the C, and the same third, that is the A flat. In the last chord, the 1C chord, the root note remains at the same position. And now we have the third note above it, which is an octave higher from the third in the 1B chord. And lastly, we have the same fifth, the C, at the same place. So in summary, how to determine the type of inversion? First, we need to figure out what chords do these notes form. Do they form a 1 chord, 2 chord, 4 chord, or 5 chord? So this means we merely consider the notes in their root position and figure out the Roman numerals as we did in the previous two videos. And remember, for that we always need to know which key we are working in. Second, we need to find out whether the lowest note, or what we call the bass note, is the root note, the third note, or the fifth note of the original chord. And that's essentially what I just demonstrated above. If the lowest note is the root note, then that's the root position chord, or the A chord. Meanwhile, if the lowest note is the third note, then that's the first inversion chord, or the B chord. And lastly, if the lowest note is the fifth note, then that's the second inversion chord, or the C chord. One thing we should bear in mind is that apart from the lowest note, the other notes in the chord don't really affect the type of inversion. So for example, in a 1A chord, it can have 3 notes, the F, A flat, and C, but it can also have 4 notes, F, A flat, and C, and another F above, or they can also be more spread out across the space. So in this case, the F in the bass, and above it a C, and another F, the A flat, and the C. All these chords are 1A chord because they all have F, A flat, and C note, and the bass notes are all F. The The same logic applies to the first inversion and the second inversion chords. All these notes here are either F, A flat, and C, and they are all the same F minor 1 chord that we know, only that in the 1B chord, all the bass notes or the lowest notes are the A flat, and all the bass notes in the 1C chord are the C notes, and that's what distinguishes the type of inversion. Now that we have learned about what inversions are, we're well equipped to do these questions. Let's look at the key. It says the key is E major, and it will be helpful if we outline the chords in E major first, like what we have been doing. Furthermore, you may also want to write the letter names above these chords. To figure out what chord A is, we should first figure out if it's chord 1, 2, 4, or 5. If we look at the treble clef, we have all the notes we need. From the lowest, the A, and then we have the C sharp and the E. In the bass clef, we have another C sharp. So in this case, it's simply an A, C sharp, E chord, and that makes it a 4 chord. And in order to consider what inversion it is, we simply need to determine if the bass note is the root, third, or fifth. And in this case, because it's a C sharp in the bass, that makes it a first inversion. And the answer is 4B. Looking at chord B now, in the bass clef we have a B and G sharp, and above them we have an E. If we think about this, in root position we have E, G sharp, and B, and that makes it a 1 chord. And to determine the inversion, we simply need to look at the bass note. In this case, it's the 5th note, so that makes it a second inversion, and so the answer is 1C. And now let's look at the last chord. In the bass clef, we have B and F sharp, and in the treble clef, we have a D sharp, and that makes it a B, D sharp, F sharp chord in root position, which is a 5 chord. And to determine the inversion, we just simply need to look at the bass note, which is a B, and that is simply the root note of the original chord, and this makes it a 5A in this case. And that's how you tackle questions like this. As a general rule, always check the key first, and then find out what chord it is, whether it's 1, 2, 4, or 5, and lastly, we simply have to figure out the inversion by looking at the bass notes. If you're looking for some more practice, I'll highly recommend that you visit this interactive site where I've put together a lot of practice tests and mock papers with instant feedback. In the drill mode, you'll have access to all the questions section by section, so that you can focus on specific question types and practice them until you feel confident. There are virtually unlimited questions. In the exam mode, you have access to full papers in the exact format of the exam, with randomized questions each time. You have 2 hours to finish the complete paper, at the end of which you'll be given your score and feedback.